you can see me and you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Very good. Let me begin by making a couple of remarks before I go to the slideshow. I tend to think of science as arising out of curiosity. And if you think of that, a situation in which you're curious about how something works, then you see very clearly how it is that an objective world, at least a local one, is coming into being as a result of that, because you're curious about something and a distinction has occurred between that observer and some phenomenon. And then you want to know what's going on, and so you want to share it. And so that local objectivity is fine. It just have to be careful about how far you want to extend it. Let me give you an example. If I, in front of you, show you that I have this strange rope, which allows me to tie a knot in it, and it does, it gets lots of interesting knots in it, as you can see. I hope you can see the knot that I've made here, perfectly nice knot. And the curious thing about that knot is that it disappears. It's just not there. And yet, on the other hand, as I said, it's something special about this rope. I tie the knot again for you, not in any really different way, and yet here it is, and it hasn't disappeared. So the question then is, what happened there? And lots of people react to the magic trick as scientists, and they will tell you immediately what their theory is about how that worked. And so they assume a world that the magician may contradict. The magician may verbally create a world in which he says that the rope is magical and it just has knots that disappear. But the person knows that that rope is in the real world and figures out a hypothesis about what actually happened during the trick. So you can see how objectivity at a certain level is inevitable. And it's a question of how far you continue such things. Let me try a slideshow if I could. There it is. I think everyone can see this. Let me try it in full screen mode. So there, all right. I might mention that this glyph here is due to John Wheeler, the physicist, and he thinks of it as the sign that represents the universe, that's a U, and the universe observes itself. And this universe is observing the Big Bang, which occurs over there on the right-hand side. He's looking backward in time at the Big Bang. There's some discussion that's related to that, but I just leave it to you as a nice observer glyph. And let me go on to a statement of Heinz. Heinz said, "I am the observed relation between myself and observing myself." And here I'm standing in language, and I'm standing in the situation of language which we always live in, that there is no difference between the language and the language that speaks about the language. There is no difference between the language and the meta-language. The observer is always included in the language. And yet, on the other hand, language can be written and put down and given to you and separated, so that distinctions which we first understand to be arising with an observer also somehow become currency and can be exchanged and exist in worlds independent of the observers or shared by those observers. And this is a situation that is curious and arouses your curiosity, and you would like to understand it better. So at this level of cognition, there is some of understanding cognition and epistemology. There's always something further that one would like to understand. Let me go on. Von Forster's eye is an example of an eigenform, a fixed point of the operations of its context and created by that context. I am the one who says I is a simpler example. I equals the one who says I equals the one who says, and the one who says can be thought of as the operation, and the I is fixed by it. And yet, on the other hand, the two I's in the sentence, I am the one who says I, are not quite the same. And yet, when you write it, they are the same. And the I could be anyone, not only within the purvey of my own speech, but in relation to whoever reads it. So, so this kind of fixed point is not so fixed. And yet the language curling in on itself is occurring all the time. And the reason I bring this up in trying to speak about science is that this occurs all the time in trying to do any science. If it were the science of understanding how that magic trick works, you have to ask, what did I perceive and what is going on here? And you never leave the domain of some observer. You always are working with that interaction. And so when the science gets a little larger, it's easy to forget. A mathematician may say, I know that there are infinitely many prime numbers, I can prove it, and other people agree with me, and it's an objective fact. But it is, in fact, an objective fact about a game that we construct. And if we teach it, we understand this immediately, because we have to teach the game of numbers and how to work with them, and find out that there are enough agreements among us so that we could come to a meaningful understanding of a statement, an objective statement, like there are infinitely many primes. But the objectivity is about our construction, not about a world that existed or exists independent of our construction. Thought is composed of thought. An organism produces itself through its own productions. A market is composed of individuals whose actions influence the market, just as the actions of the market influence these individuals. The participant is an observer, but not an objective observer. There is no objective observer, and yet objects, repeatability, a whole world of actions, and a reality to be explored arise in the reflexive domain, which got misspelled. Within the reflexive context, we can rebuild and extend science to include the world as conversation. A conversation that constructs itself and a world. That's it.